with Drilling for Prosperity. And tonight I've got Deidra Garyk with me, who is an ESG manager with a energy services company based in Calgary. And part of our what we're going to go over today is just kind of a high level on the environmental, social, and governance, or the ESG, what's coming down the pipeline, and impacts on corporations and people, and where it might be going. So the agenda here is roughly about 20 minutes of Deidra and I just talking, and then we'll go into a question and answer. If you do have any questions, there's a comment section on the right-hand side, I believe. And if you put them in there, Walter, who is helping out in the background, will make sure that we get the questions sent our way. And we should hopefully wrap this up within half an hour and go from there. So first off, I want to introduce Deidra Garyk, who, as I said, works at a energy services company in Calgary here, where I live, and is their ESG manager. And Deidra, can you maybe give a little bit of information on your background and tell us who you are?
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to your audience. So as Chris said, I am currently working in oilfield services, but I started my career almost 20 years ago working on the producer side. So I have a broad swath of knowledge, worked in joint venture contracts. So that was more on the midstream side, on the facility side. So I was above ground, and now I'm working for energy services, and we do the hydraulic fracturing, the cementing, the coil tubing. So all the work below ground, all the necessary work to produce oil and gas today in our modern society. And outside of my professional commitments, I have had the great fortune of getting to advocate for the industry. I write regularly. I do a lot of research into energy issues. I public speak on and really advocate for smart energy policy for the betterment of our country, our province, for the workers, and basically just everybody, so that we sustain our modern level of living standards.
Excellent. Appreciate that. And yeah, if you get a chance, just look up Deidra on online. And I caught wind of you through an article on Energy Now, and it was piqued my curiosity, obviously, and everything like that. So it's lots of good stuff. So today, just to set kind of the tone here, it's not us complaining about ESG. It's going to try to be kind of just a neutral. What is it? All that stuff, some of the good, some of the bad, whatever it is. We'll just, we'll start off with the first thing is, what is ESG and how did it come about?
Sure. Yes, that abstract, nebulous acronym that I think we're all hearing all over. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance. You may have heard of it in the past as corporate social responsibility, or you're currently kind of hearing maybe sustainability. Both those terms, ESG and sustainability, are often used side by side. But it's really looking at non-financial metrics and topics for reporting. So environmental is really like, how is the company a good environmental steward? And so it is things like, what's the climate change plan? What's the energy transformation plan? Reporting your greenhouse gas emissions, but also looking at things like water usage. Social is really kind of, how does a company treat its employees and the communities where it operates, as well as how does it work with its supply chain and its customers. So you're looking at, what are the working conditions, health and safety, extremely important to our industry as well. Employee relations. Now, this is where the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece comes in. That's something that's gaining a lot more interest and traction. Then there's also the governance piece, and that's really, how does the company behave? This kind of helps the public measure how ethical the company is. So there's requirements to report on executive pay and bribery and corruption and political lobbying and things like that. So again, they're not financial metrics, but they can have a financial impact on the company. And so that's why really ESG is very much driven by the financial community. The big institutional investors, like you're probably hearing about BlackRock a lot in the news, or there's Vanguard and State Street. These are the big funds that hold pensions and other things like that, multi-trillion dollars. They're really the ones that are driving it. And because companies have to raise money, we do have to report. Like there are certain things that we just sort of end up having to do to comply with what these big fund managers want. And that is why you're starting to hear more and more about ESG. But it's not just the financial community. Our governments and our regulators, they're embracing it. Like a lot of this stuff is enshrined in law in the EU. The SEC in the US is putting it into a number of requirements for publicly traded companies. And we are expecting to see mandatory reporting coming very soon to Canada as well. And so you're really focusing on material risks and having to do due diligence on all of that. And know that this is a business. Like, it isn't going away. There are a lot of people that are making a lot of money off of it. The big four accounting firms, they're very supportive. I think they see dollar signs when they see this, because there's going to be audit requirements. You've got Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg, very influential people globally and very influential in the ESG space. So they're probably not going to be interested in walking away from this anytime soon. They're pushing ahead with this. And I really do want to say, like, I'm neither disciple nor detractor from ESG. I'm really not that black and white. I think ESG in general is not black and white. There's a lot of nuance. It's in the news for a lot of reasons now. You probably heard that a number of Republican attorneys general have pushed back, and they're saying, like, no more. We're going after you for your ESG reporting requirements. And it doesn't need to be kind of as controversial as I think it has become, but it is important that we are all aware of what's happening, so that we can be a part of sort of building all of this.
Well, so part of the way I look at it, there's public companies and private companies, and is there a difference between either one as it relates to how ESG may impact them?
Mm-hmm. Well, the answer is kind of yes and no. I mean, for publicly traded companies, they're going to be bound by whatever rules come down from the regulator, like the SEC or the Canadian Securities Administrators. So, we have that. We know there's sort of a path that they're taking to implement mandatory reporting. And so, yeah, you might think, well, okay, fine. I'm private. It doesn't matter. Or, hey, I'll just take my company private, and then, hey, problem solved. But the challenge really is that it's going to impact the supply chain. Really, I think that's where you're going to start to see it. So your private companies are probably working, especially your smaller private companies, your small businesses. They're probably suppliers to larger companies who they're going to have their own reporting requirements, which means that the supply chain is going to have to report. I was just reading through Gibson Energy's ESG report over the last couple of days, and they actually have a supplier code. And to be a supplier for them, you have to basically be in alignment with where they are going. They have a net zero commitment. If you do not meet their standards, you are not going to be a supplier for them. So yes, each type of company is going to be treated perhaps a little bit differently, but not entirely. I think everybody is going to end up getting impacted. And the other side of things is that the banks, the 6 largest banks in Canada, have actually signed on to certain international standards that they have sort of made commitments to, but also the feds have actually said that the banks and insurance companies have to report on their clients' emissions in particular. And so I know at least a couple of the big banks are starting with energy and utilities, those two portfolios. That'll probably go down as they get more emissions and other climate related information. So it's kind of climate stress tests and risks that they're looking at. So as they knock off the energy and utility companies, they're going to start going after other industries. And I mean, fully expect small businesses are going to get caught up in this too. If you want to borrow money or get insurance, they're going to require that you report certain things, that you maybe show that you have an energy transition plan, what have you. All of this stuff is sort of being worked out. So we're waiting to get the details and the specifics, but it's coming. The train is on the tracks and it is not slowing down. If anything, it's going faster and it's going to impact more and more businesses and people ultimately.
I saw it, especially, I used to work in the investment banking space about a decade ago. And I still remember one of the big banks, I'll remain nameless, that, and I think I told you this story when we met a couple of weeks ago, but they would not lend to an oil and gas company or a brand new one until they found an equal size renewable company that they would invest in. So it would kind of keep them zero, net zero type thing. So it is, I agree with you. And I think it's down at the, even at a local level in Alberta, a small little local level, if you're going to supply services to these companies, like you say, you're going to have to, unfortunately or fortunately, adhere to their rules and what they're doing. Couple of quick things, just really quick. I see some questions are coming in. We're going to hold off to the end on those ones, but we will get to them when we get there. Now, when it comes to responsibility for ESG in an organization, is it every one of the companies got a role, or is there one typical person like you, or is it like upper management? How's that play out in a corporation?
Well, what I do typically see is that a lot of it is kind of driven by boards and executive management, driven by, and then also they're holding the majority of the responsibility for the outcomes. But ultimately, everybody ends up being involved. So when we worked on our 2021 ESG report last year, almost every department ended up being involved in some capacity, because you need numbers from a variety of departments. In my company, I'm the only one. I'm a department of one. Some companies, obviously the larger companies, some of those that they get a lot of attention on them. I'm sure Shell has a ginormous ESG department because they've had so much attention on them. So it'll really depend on the size of the company, but a lot of times boards are driving this because, there's an increase in shareholder activism, wanting more climate related disclosure and just sort of more thought, more plans on what companies are doing in terms of climate change mitigation. And boards, some board members are at risk. We've seen a few of the activist investors come in, like Exxon lost a few board members as a result. So I think it is on most boards' radar from what I can tell. And so it does seem to be, for the most part, driven a lot by boards, but executive often have some portion of their compensation tied to ESG performance. So it really is kind of reaching all levels of the company, especially sort of in larger companies. Now, obviously, your very small companies, I would say it's probably a very different situation. It's probably somebody off the side of their desk trying desperately to figure out what to do with a lot of it, because it's costly and it's time consuming.
I'm seeing it. I do work in the well abandonment space, and we're starting to see, the guys that I'm dealing with are being asked for, do you have any ESG stories that we could put in? So I think I see it going down to the field level even. So As it relates to it, I mean, when I first caught wind of this a few years back, it's one thing, and then it starts to progress to kind of where we are today. Where do you see ESG going? Like, I'm not going to go way down the road, but next 2 years to potentially 5 years, what do you see happening?
Yeah, I think this is probably, hopefully, one of the most important takeaways of today's conversation is where are things going in the very near future. I'm going to really focus on Canada, just because that's where you live, and that's sort of what I focus my day job on, even as Canadian regulations. It's very, very likely that the Canadian Securities Administrators are going to adopt the new international sustainability standards that have just been released. They just announced a couple of days at Davos that these standards that have sort of been in a draft form are going to be released in June of this year. So we'll know exactly what it is that they're going to put forward. It's under the IFRS, which, not to get too technical, but that's the International Financial Reporting Standards. And they are the ones that like drive the rules around financial reporting. So it's all going to end up tying together into what's called integrated reporting. So it is just basically going to be a longer financial statement. So companies will have to report on their financials, and then they'll have to report on their climate and sustainability metrics. So yeah, we're seeing that that's going to be coming down imminently. Now, like, the consequences for not doing it are basically going to be very similar to the consequences of not reporting, or not reporting honestly and accurately for your financials. There are going to be fines. You're going to get in trouble. You get kicked off stock exchanges if you don't do what it is that you're supposed to do. So this is coming imminently. Expect it by sort of 2024, 2025. A lot of the Fed's rules that are coming down for the banks are they're becoming effective in 2024. So I don't know what the grace period is going to be for companies to gather their information and report it. Maybe 25, 26. I don't know what year it'll end up being, but it may seem like that's a long ways away. But trust me, to try and gather all this information takes a whole lot of time.
Oh, I'm sure it's very time consuming. I guess, when you talk about these new standards coming out, you say Davos, and I'm like, but anyways, Harry, it's, is there going to be like metrics that people have to adhere to? Like, it's, so many parts per million of something, or this, or, your boards have to be this much minorities, and so on and so forth. Is there going to be actual standards that are pegged on that?
Well, again, the answer is yes and no. You're asking some great questions, Chris. So right now, I haven't seen anything that actually says, like, okay, your emissions have to be X. Like, there is going to be a requirement that you have to report those emissions. Yeah, I mean, there are, if you set targets, and a lot of companies are setting targets, because that's sort of maybe where the peer pressure is pushing companies, is like, what's your target? Are you getting to net zero? How much are you cutting emissions by 2030? If you don't meet those targets, it's very likely you could end up in some sort of litigation. We are seeing climate-related litigation increasing. So, there's a consequence to that. So maybe right now we might be able to sort of set our own numbers, targets, numbers. But eventually somebody's going to hold us to it. And then, well, if the Feds say, well, the banks have to decrease their clients' emissions, then that's how it's going to end up coming into play as well, that there's going to be requirements, and somehow you're just going to have to meet those, similar to the 42% emissions cap that the oil and gas industry is going to be subject to.
That's strong arm tactics, I guess, right? It's potential. So
yeah, it is. And again, unless you can somehow mobilize an army of people to get a political regime change in all Western countries, like this is happening, the governments of every country seem to be involved in this and starting to regulate it. And on the people side, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the EU has actually just, I think it was sort of mid last year, put into place a law requiring companies of a certain size, obviously larger companies, have to have 40% women, or they might say gender diverse people on their board. So yeah, there's one that's a number. Not every metric has like a firm number like that, but we're starting to see that even in Canada. We've got that 50-30 challenge. It's not mandatory right now, but the feds have a challenge out there to companies to have 50% women representation on the board and in executive, and 30% minority representation.
Let's see how that impacts.
Yeah, and we'll see how long that stays voluntary, right? They may begin to mandate it.
Yeah, for sure. I just don't see ESG going away, but is there, we've hit about 20 minutes here while we were talking just on the questions. They're great questions coming in, but, is there other things within the whole ESG world that, a couple things that you may think of that just people need to think of? Like one that comes to mind is, are we personally going to end up with ESG scores, like for humans, right? Because you keep hearing about this, you've used too much carbon, your credit card's cut off, can't go driving. Like where do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's very probable, I'll call it. Now, I think, we can't only look at this from the negative. I mean, there are certain opportunities that come from this. We get more information on companies. We get to sort of vote with our dollars. You get to invest wherever it is that you feel that you would like to invest. But yeah, I do think that there are potentially going to be impacts to individuals in the form of somehow, the banks are... We're probably all clients of a bank. And so if the feds are saying the banks and insurance companies have to report on their clients' climate plans and stress test, et cetera, then chances are eventually the individual is going to have some sort of ESG rating or score similar to a company. Now, this is complete speculation. I have not seen or heard anything about this, but I think, it's not a far stretch to think that this is where it could go next. It's already set up for companies, so why not for people, for individuals, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going to go to some of the questions that are being asked right now. We can try to keep them short, so we try to keep within about the next 7 to 10 minutes here. Sherry asks, break down diversity and inclusion. So I'm hoping that makes sense to you. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to break it down. I don't know what that question means.
Okay, so Sherry, if you want to put some clarification in, Walter, who's in the background monitoring, will be able to let us know. Allison was talking about not interested in the ESG connected to an individual tracker, even though we just talked to that. One of the things that Allison did ask is, how is China doing on the ESG front, or is that just a word they've never even heard?
Well, here's the challenge. Saudi Aramco has an ESG report, and they're making certain commitments to renewables. And we know that China has said that they're going to be net zero by 2060. Who knows? Are they actually going to follow through?
Yeah,
and
and
if they don't, well, then what? Who's going to do something about it? So yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that certain countries are larger emitters, and that, if indeed we need to reduce emissions, then they have to be a part of this too. But I'm not sure how that's actually going to play out in reality.
One here is actually a good thing, because there's a lot of people that actually probably watch their own small businesses. Says, what about small businesses who will not be able to afford the ESG regulations?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some numbers on this, and it's pretty staggering. So the SEC has put out a report, and around the same time another company did a report, and they both came out with very similar numbers. The cost of disclosure and compliance for companies to report on average is $677,000. Now, obviously, more for big companies, less for small. The SEC said, yeah, $640,000 for the first year, and then $530,000 per year ongoing. Extraordinarily prohibitive for small businesses. I don't have the answer to that. And again, I think this is why we cannot abdicate this space. We have to understand what's going on. Get involved in anything that you can to sort of influence, because I think this is it's outrageous, and it only impacts the consumer, because small businesses are going to go out of business. We get less choice. Obviously, the direct impact to small business owners and workers and communities, etc. It's a huge problem. It's absolutely a huge problem, and right now it's being dictated by sort of people at the more global international level, and multinational corporations and investment firms like BlackRock. They're not necessarily thinking about the small little 1-2 person supplier for oil field services. Obviously they're not going to spend $500,000 likely on reporting, but it's time that they'll have to spend away from doing what it is that they do for their business to make it succeed. And yes, there will be a cost. And so, yeah, we absolutely need to be aware, because we cannot let this run away.
Yeah. You know what? People are asking great questions. Unfortunately, Walter's copied and pasted and put it in private chat for me. So I can't call you out who's actually asking on some of these, but I just want to let people know you're asking great questions. Next one that I have here is, so the banks and insurance companies, will they be the ones policing these companies, or is it going to still be, I'm sure publicly listed will be the SEC or TSX or whoever is the governing bodies. Who will be actually policing this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's great to set all kinds of laws and rules and regulations, but there has to be an enforcement component. And I don't know. I don't know who's going to do it. Because what jurisdiction does a bank really have over forcing companies to stop emitting? But at the same time, then they'll just probably turn around and reject your loan request, etc. Right? I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do it. Other than in some capacity, we're all going to have to put forward some kind of disclosure report. And almost every publicly traded large, medium, large size oil and gas company has an ESG report. You can go and pick your favorite company and go and take a look at it. There are a lot of numbers. And so in some way, you'll probably just have to hand off an audited spreadsheet to the bank or your insurance company. And they'll look at it and they'll say, okay, well, yeah, we think you're actually doing something and we like you, so we'll give you money. And otherwise, maybe they say, we don't like you, so we're not investing in you. Look at the divestment movement. It's been actually quite successful to the detriment of, everybody around the world, particularly Europeans, who are getting hardest hit with the energy security issue. But yeah, it's really, everything is sort of fuzzy and gray right now. There's a lot of talk about what's coming down in the near future, but it's not, there's still a lot of uncertainty when the feds say, well, hey, banks, insurance companies, you have to make sure your clients are meeting the emissions reduction targets. They don't, I haven't seen anything that says it, and this is how you're going to enforce it. So maybe it results in just really high interest rates to borrow money. I don't know. Yeah, it's very unclear right now what the consequences are. And
it'll be interesting to see. And I'll give you an example, right? In the asset retirement obligation world for oil and gas companies, banks originally were asking them, what's on your books, and it would be once a year you'd have to report. Then it became twice a year. Now it's down to quarterly. They're actually asking this stuff quarterly, and you got to tell them that you're actually doing stuff to get rid of these liabilities. So that's outside of ESG, but it kind of plays in where it's. People are looking at what what is, what are you doing with your company? So it's not just ESG, it's other areas where companies are being hammered on this stuff, right? And we're trying to keep it neutral here on this stuff as opposed to hammering on it one way or the other. But one great question that just came out, this is a really good one, is where do you see ESG in 5 years from now, and how will it impact local oil and gas producers competitively versus oil and gas producers in the U.S.? Not even the U.S., I would just say the world. We've got the cleanest, most ethical oil and gas ever produced, and it's got to be tough competing against a world market when, from one, we can't get it out, but two, we're going to start getting hammered on all this stuff because it's just the way it is. But where do you see it impacting the competitiveness on say oil and gas, even though you're not directly in an oil and gas company?
Well, there's probably multiple ways I could answer this. If you want to compare to the US, the SEC's climate disclosure rules are apparently like a 400-page document of what's going to be required. So the US is not, they're not getting away with this. Internationally, lots of stringent standards in the UK and the European Union. I mean, you've got your Middle Eastern countries and some other countries that produce oil and gas, Venezuela, whatever, that maybe will say certain things, but they're not necessarily going to be bound to it to the same degree. And so for sure, I think that potentially it does impact our competitiveness. Now, I mean, ESG isn't probably directly going to affect the commodity price per se, but it's going to affect the costs, the bottom line for companies. Companies of a certain size are just going to have to hire people to do this because it's very, very time consuming, and it really is a lot of times non-productive time. Now, that being said, I mean, there are ways to look at this from an opportunity perspective. Like, you do get to kind of dig into what it is that your company is doing, and maybe you can start to make some improvements. I liken this to safety 20, 30 years ago, where everybody was just like, what, safety? Like, we don't need to worry about that. We're fine. And now, I mean, you would never even consider going on site without proper PPE. So we're kind of in the early stages of the safety world where everybody's kind of going, oh my God, what's going on? This is just going to be a problem. But, look at it also as an opportunity to kind of strengthen your business. There's lots of government grants right now for innovative clean tech. Maybe there's new products or ideas you can try. Really try to look at this as an opportunity to make your business more resilient, because you do get to kind of dig down and look into things like, how are you treating your employees? How are they feeling about things? Maybe there's some improvements that you can make, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's one area. I also own a Internet of Things company. I've told you about this before, but I was talking to an oil and gas company yesterday, and I was talking about monitoring electricity, which kind of falls into that environmental side, and they're talking about that's our biggest cost, and any way that we can figure out how to reduce that, subsequently that can turn into an ESG story, which is we reduce this, which means we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so on and so forth. But it also makes them more competitive. So there is a good side to it. There is a bad side. We could all drag that out and talk about it, where there's things that are frustrating about it, right? But it is one of those things where we're just going to have to see where it ends up going as well. So with that, though, I think we'll wrap this up. It's been just a little over half an hour. I'm going to have Deidra back in a few weeks. She actually was she did a couple of posts on something that's coming down the pipeline that is potentially devastating to the oil and gas industry. And it involves environmental non-government organizations. not to let too much out of the bag or anything like that, but we're going to have you back so you can talk about that, because it's shocking when you told it to me. I was like, wow. Basically, it's trying to cut off our oil supply or our gas supply out to the world. It's awful. We are going to, by the way, we are going to be having more webinars in the future. Obviously, we're trying to do these every couple of weeks. We will have other people on discuss risks of ESG. We just only have such limited time here today to go into it. But we will bring other people on, or maybe even have Deidra back to tell us a little bit about that. You can go to drillingforprosperity.com to find out more about the oil and gas sector. We're starting to post more and more information there as well. And Walter, who is our VP of Communications in the background, has informed me that I want to let you guys know about this, that Drilling for Prosperity is committed to ensuring that Albertans have access to the facts that they need to make informed decisions about the energy industry. We're all in this together, and we want to try to make the industry stronger. We want to advocate for ourselves, and just literally try to prosper. If we figure out ways that we can fight potential things that are coming down the pipeline and allow us to prosper. So with that said, Deidra, do you have any closing comments you want to say, or are you good? Or
well, people can follow me on social media. If you want to ask me a few more questions, you can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk about different things. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of the negativity around ESG, because I know there's quite an anti-ESG movement going right now, but I'm happy to have kind of balanced, respectful conversations about things, and so I'm happy to answer people's questions about this.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for showing up and giving us half an hour, almost 40 minutes of your time. We do really appreciate it. Our next webinar has not been determined yet, but I'm starting to lean more towards this just transition. I'm trying to find someone there. So if anyone knows anyone that's got some clarity on that, feel free to reach out to us at the Drilling for Prosperity on the site, or you can reach me, Chris, at peoplepowered.network if you know anyone, or you are that kind of person that could talk to that sort of stuff. And we'll go from there. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Deidra, for your time.
Thanks, everyone.